Welcome back, Defenders. Jake here. Looks like it was another bad day for the Russians in Avdiivka. 18 tanks lost and 43 armored vehicles. Wow. And since we went over 300,000 soldiers killed fighting for Russia and Ukraine, somebody made a bar chart. And this bar chart is actually very informative, because the first 2 weeks of the war were the deadliest weeks for the Russian forces. Russia's brilliant invasion strategy of attack from everywhere and don't even tell our own soldiers where they're going or what they'll be doing wasn't working. As soon as Russia realized this was not going to be a special 3-day military operation, they scaled back their operations and ambition. We then saw the first spike in Russian casualties last September during the Kharkiv counteroffensive, spiked again in November during the Kherson counteroffensive, and then the death count just went crazy as Wagner PMC was meat wave assaulting Bakhmut with prisoners. As soon as the Russians captured Bakhmut, their casualty counts started going down, but you'll notice it's still significantly higher in 2023 than it was in 2022. The difference being the delivery of Western weapons to the Ukrainian military. There was then another spike for about 4 weeks as Ukraine launched their counteroffensive last summer, trying to make a breakthrough in Zaporizhia. It then started to decline, but the last 3 weeks, huge spikes in Russian losses as they're doing meat wave assault tactics again to try and take the city of Avdiivka. We'll get to the map and talk about Avdiivka in a second, but we have to follow up on this riot at the airport in Dagestan. This Russian man failed to find any Jews hiding in the engine. This is the Red Wings plane from Tel Aviv. Thankfully, there's no reports of any of the passengers being harmed. But what's the response from the Russian government as thousands of Russian men destroyed one of their own airports? Anti-Semitic rioters in Dagestan escape harsh punishment. So thousands of Russian men destroyed this airport, breaking windows, smashing down doors. They looted and stole all the items from all the shops in the airport. Surely someone has to be held accountable by the Russian government. Russian courts sentenced 15 over anti-Israeli airport riots. Okay, so maybe like 15 leaders of the riots are being held accountable. Let's see how many years in prison they're going to be getting. Courts in Dagestan, a Muslim-majority region, have sentenced 15 people between 2 and 10 days in prison for their involvement in the riot. So to recap, if you hold a blank piece of paper to protest in Moscow or St. Petersburg, you're going to get 8 to 10 years in jail. But if you break windows and smash down doors and steal all the items from shops, 2 to 10 days, maybe. So here's Solyov's response on Kremlin state TV. For over a year, Solyov has been begging the Muslim world to commit jihad against the West. He views the world's Muslim population as a weapon to exploit to Russia's advantage. And this wasn't the jihad he wanted. Muslim men destroying a Russian airport, hunting for Jews, given that Solyov is Jewish. So here's his tirade on Kremlin state TV. Like all of you, I treat what happened in Dagestan with the utmost seriousness. I see this as a preparation for possible demonstrations among radical representatives of various diasporas in different cities. We just saw how, for a small amount of money, using an absolutely clear methodology, it was possible to bring out 2,000 people who went to storm the airport. In general, if you look at it, it couldn't have been any stupider. Where did they go? What did these jackals, these shaitans, wanted to see or say? I don't know this word. Shaitan, in Muslim countries, it means devil, Satan, or evil spirit. So that's what he's calling these Russian men. Are these people the followers of Islam? No, these shaitans have been betraying Islam. They are complete shaitans who have betrayed Islam. What does the Prophet Muhammad, blessed be his name forever and ever, say about the Jews? What are the Jews called? People of the book. How are they to be treated? How are the people who live next to them to be treated? Ask every Muslim, they know. These people don't know. These people don't know the Holy Quran. These people are an affront to Islam. I am not the one who said that. Who am I to judge? Okay, Solyov, whatever. Here's the real reason why nobody from the airport riot is being punished. Russia is afraid of losing control of these regions. According to the Institute for the Study of Warfare, Russian officials are concerned about losing grip on periphery regions. So the Northern Caucasus is a hodgepodge of different cultures and ethnicities. These people don't identify as Russian. They're Dagestani, they're Chechen. Chechnya already fought 2 wars for independence in the 90s, with the Russians brutally oppressing these people, trying to erase their ethnic identity. Despite Russia's best attempts, if central control in Moscow ever starts to loosen, yes, these are going to be the first people to rebel and declare independence, to free themselves from Kremlin dominion. Here's an interesting poll. 70% of Russians support ending the war in Ukraine, with one caveat, with one but. These figures are according to a survey conducted in Russia by the Levada Analytical Center. And the Russians who want to end this war are also saying they want to keep everything that Russia has taken. Most Russians would not support ending invasion if it meant returning occupied territories to Ukraine. So Russians want to end the war, but they want to end the war getting to keep all the land they've stolen. So the occupied territories in Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, they're tired of this war. They don't feel the need to go any farther, but they're not willing to give up anything they've already stolen. This is called, in the business, a sunk cost fallacy, the phenomenon where a person is reluctant to abandon a strategy or course of action because they have invested heavily in it, even when it is clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. This war can end at any moment. All Russia has to do is go back to their own country and stay there. Stop attacking their neighbors, stop trying to redraw the lines on the map, stop thinking in imperial terms that they can use their military to subjugate other people and grow their empire. So the Russians aren't done. Russian command is ordering more meat assaults, and at the moment, their big objective is to take the city of Avdiivka. At the moment, Avdiivka holds. Ukraine has pretty much halted their offensive operations in Zaporizhia. They're still doing the cross-river raids in Kherson, but I do think this has Ukraine's high command's top attention, holding Avdiivka. If you can be on the defensive, and Russia is willing to waste material and their soldiers, suiciding into those defenses, yes, this is advantageous for Ukraine. This should be their top priority. As we discussed, Russia is taking horrendous casualties just trying to capture the city of Avdiivka. Why? Why Avdiivka? Why now? And Putin still has not made his speech to the Russian people announcing his re-election campaign. It's getting pretty close to the March elections, so yes, I think Putin is waiting, hoping his military can capture Avdiivka before he goes on television or has a rally and declares, We took Avdiivka, we're winning this war. So let's now talk about this Time magazine article. This is a offensive headline. Nobody believes in our victory like I do. Nobody. It's been nearly 2 years. Russia still controls a fifth of Ukraine's territory. Tens of thousands have been killed. Global support for the war is shrinking. If the West stops supporting Ukraine, that doesn't end the war. The Russians are never going to stop. So this stupid article was written by Simon Schuster, and Simon Schuster is a Russian sympathizer. Here's a tweet he wrote in 2014. Just paid for a coffee in Russian rubles. Welcome to the new Crimea, people. Like it or not. So it's disheartening that Time magazine let him write this article about Zelensky, citing unnamed sources, saying that support for Ukraine is weakening. And Time just ran with it, with this stupid headline that makes it look like nobody supports Ukraine. So let me give you the perspective of a Ukrainian journalist. This is Ilya Ponomarenko, based out of Bucha. Here are his thoughts on Twitter. We're all terribly at ease now. We seem to have entirely forgotten the fact that, above everything else, Ukraine is fighting a war of defense against one of the world's largest military powers that enjoys an immense stock of resources along with a colossal material legacy from the Soviet military. It's an effing man-made miracle that over 600 days into a full-scale invasion, we are where we are, and 80% of Ukraine's territory is free from occupation. Neither Kyiv nor Kharkiv or Odessa or Lviv are under Russian occupation. Just recall the days of February of 2022 and Russia's Kievan 3 days bravado. He then continues, all the incredible things that Ukraine has achieved the last 600 days, holding back the Russians. And the Ukrainians know they can do this. They know they can win this war if they just get the aid from the West they need. So in response to this Time magazine article, General Zaluzhnyi published his own article in The Economist. Ukraine must escape from the trap of a prolonged war. So this is the article he wrote, Ukraine's top general on the breakthrough he needs to beat Russia. I'll link it down below if you want to read it. This one is much better than the Time magazine article. And here's a tweet from General Zaluzhnyi. The threat of the transition to a positional war is a serious challenge for Ukraine. Prolongation is beneficial to the enemy, after which it will give him the opportunity to reconstitute and increase his military capabilities. So this is Putin's strategy to win this war. Get a ceasefire, get a freeze in the conflict, then spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years rebuilding your military, and then attack Ukraine again to go for even more. Anybody pushing for a ceasefire is doing exactly what the Kremlin wants. They are towing the Kremlin line. In the Economist article, General Zaluzhnyi outlined the 5 most necessary measures for Ukraine to be implemented in order to avoid a lengthy and drawn-out war. Number 1, gain air superiority. Number 2, breach mine barriers in depths. Number 3, increase effective counter battery. Number 4, build up electronic warfare capabilities. Number 5, create and train necessary reserves. So Ukraine has a plan. They have the will, they have the fighters to win this war. For another Ukrainian perspective, this is Maria Avdiivka out of Kharkiv. Here are her thoughts on weakening support for Ukraine in the West.
Many ask if we here in Ukraine feel abandoned or are Russian attacks being ignored now. We just can't afford to think so. Russia continues relentless attack on civilians and critical infrastructure. Russia attacks along the entire front line. And to keep fighting, Ukraine urgently needs more weapons. Aid packages should not become the question of political debate or election cycles. By continuing supporting Ukraine, you support global fight with terrorism, countries that sponsor terrorism and aggressor countries such as Russia, Iran, and others. Keep supporting Ukraine and let's win in this war together. Slava Ukraini!
The governments of Iran and Russia are state sponsors of terrorism. They are funding and feeding terrorist groups all over the world. The best way to defeat global terrorism is to weaken the governments of Iran and Russia. The best way to weaken the government of Russia is to give Ukraine everything they need to win this war. What happens if the US pulls the rug out from under Ukraine? The US Secretaries of State and Defense warned of dire consequences and said President Putin was using the Israel-Hamas war to distract the United States. Yes, Russia is loving every moment of this war between Israel and Hamas because it's distracting the world from their meat assaults on Avdiivka currently. So what's happening with the United States governments and their funding for Ukraine? November 17th is the deadline. Ideally, something is voted on to keep the government open and to continue militarily supporting Ukraine by November 17th. But Speaker Johnson and the House Republicans are making this very difficult for everyone. So initially, the White House and the Senate had this idea. Let's put aid for Israel and aid for Ukraine in the same bill, something House Republicans are very in support of, and maybe something House Republicans aren't as excited about. Compromise. That's what democracies do. Speaker Johnson said, F that, no way. We should vote on everything individually. Okay. He then immediately said the GOP plan to fund military aid for Israel is with IRS tax cuts. IRS tax cuts would probably decrease the amount of revenue the federal government brings in. This would not offset aid to Israel. This would probably increase the deficit even more if there was less enforcement of people not paying their taxes. But let's not get into the IRS. People hate paying taxes. I get that. But why won't House Republicans support aid for Ukraine? Why won't Speaker Johnson just allow an up or down vote? Just schedule a vote, and 350 members of the House would probably vote for it. Why are they so excited about giving aid to Israel and not about giving aid to Ukraine? And this is the stupidest thing ever. But here's Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz explaining exactly why he's in favor of aid for Israel and not aid for Ukraine. Israel is a land with a 4,000-year connection to our faith. He's speaking as a Christian. Ukraine is a former Soviet state. These are not the same thing and should be considered independently. So amongst the Christian right in America, there are fringe beliefs that when the end times come, when the rapture occurs, Christians need the Jews to control Israel or Jerusalem or Bethlehem or whatever in order for Christians to go to heaven. This is the dumbest reason in the world to be supporting Israel, but unfortunately there might be a lot of members of Congress who think this way, that it's better if Jews control Israel rather than Muslims, so when the end of the world happens, there's a clearer path to get to heaven. I don't really understand it. If you know better than me, let me know in the comments what Matt Gaetz is actually saying with this tweet. So President Biden, I hope, is putting his foot down. Biden is saying he will veto the GOP's Israel standalone aid package without funding for Ukraine. So if you hear me, AIPAC, that's the lobbyist group for Israel, this is the correct response from the White House and the Senate. Israel is not going to get any military support unless a vote is allowed for additional funding for Ukraine. It's going to get nasty the next 2 weeks in US politics. If you don't want to pay attention to it, you can just skip those articles. But in the meantime, the armies of Mordor are gathering. Russia is building a grand coalition of authoritarian states: Syria, Belarus, Iran, and North Korea. 1 million North Korean artillery rounds have been sent to Russia. This is according to South Korean intelligence. This is very tragic news because these artillery shells from North Korea are going to kill a lot of Ukrainians over the coming months. And what did North Korea get in response? North Korea sends Russian artillery rounds for satellite technical advice. The North Koreans want spy satellites, or at least one. And apparently the Russians have agreed to launch, deploy, and offer tech support to the North Koreans so they can have their own spy satellite. Spy on the United States, spy on South Korea, spy on Japan. Sure, okay. Good job, North Korea. You got a spy satellite. Wagner resumes recruitment under new leadership. Cool. Who's the new leader of the Wagner group? And it's Prigozhin's son, 25-year-old Pavel Prigozhin. Why is everything in authoritarian regimes now hereditary, dynastic? Kim Jong-un is a hereditary Stalinist state. Does Putin have sons that he hasn't revealed to us yet? Like, if Putin dies in the next 2 or 3 years, is there going to be like this 40-year-old man that just comes out of nowhere saying, I am Putin's son, I am now the Tsar of Russia? I don't get it. Kremlin eases quarantine for access to Putin as presidential elections approach. So they try to keep this a secret, but anybody who meets with President Putin up close has to go through 10 days of quarantine because the Kremlin still follows COVID protocol. Putin is deathly afraid of getting COVID or getting sick, so this is why he keeps his distance from even his closest advisors. So who the heck is this other guy that goes out in public and shakes hands and kisses babies? And according to a Japanese AI facial recognition company, they've determined that there's at least 2 Putins. Japanese experts in facial recognition and voice identification have concluded that the theory of Putin's doubles, who replaces him at public events, is gaining popularity. So the real Putin doesn't let anyone near him. He also fidgets his feet and arms and frequently coughs. The fake Putin is the guy out in public, talking to people, trying to have a good time. Let's get to the good news for Ukraine, and this is just a fun story. Secretary of State Blinken, dresses his son as President Zelensky at the White House Halloween party. So Secretary of State Blinken has 2 kids, a son and a daughter, and the daughter is actually dressed up as the Ukrainian flag, blue and yellow, and his son is dressed up as President Zelensky with that green sweatshirts. I'm sure this was just for the White House Halloween party, and these kids could be whoever they wanted when they went trick-or-treating in their neighborhood, but pretty cute and a powerful gesture in support of Ukraine for the Halloween season. Final video I have for you guys is a father coming home, a Ukrainian defender, surprising his daughter. That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.